when I came to this conference, right, I arrived at the airport and I got an email. This is the address that I'm staying at, blocked out because I'm not the only one staying there. And I'm like, great, I'm at the airport. I need to get here. I'm going to take an Uber, right? Simple. So I copy paste this and I put it into Uber, and then I get this, right? I'm sure I'm not the only one that's had this happen, right? This is like a smart link, right? My phone is trying to be helpful to me, but unfortunately, in this case, the way it was helpful was to not give me the ability to copy this as plain text. And so my workaround here, and I wonder if anyone else has done this, is I took a screenshot of the email. Then in iOS, I could select the text, then copy it as plain text, then paste it into Uber, right? Because for whatever reason, my email client would not let me copy this as plain text. I am actually curious, has anyone else done this same pattern where you need to copy something? Yeah, you know it. Okay, not the only one. All right, so, oh, there's me. I couldn't find a photo, so I thought this would be better. There's my website. I work at a place called WebSim and a place called Block Science, and I'm affiliated with this Temple Collective, which is that squiggly thing down there. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about end-user agency, especially on the web. But before we get there, I'm going to do a bit of a context setting, right? So the way I kind of see, there we go. The way I kind of see software today, right, is we have a bunch of these little boxes, right? On your phone, you open it up. It's all made of these little boxes, and they're great, right? You open the travel maps box, and it lets you get from A to B. That's delightful when it works. The problem or the challenge with this, though, right, I think can be summed up with this little image. So if we look at the distribution of what users actually need and the number of users, you have this really big hump at the beginning, right? A lot of people need a lot of the same things. And so if you're making an app, like Maps, for example, that is getting from A to B, it is looking up addresses, maybe it's knowing the weather at your destination, right? But it is not finding the best routes for carrier pigeon, but to your destination. It's not this really long tail. And we have some ways to mitigate this, right? We can move this line. So a really common one is that we'll do something like a plugin ecosystem, right? Where you basically recognize that whatever it is that you've built, it can't do all that stuff. And so instead of making a feature for every possible thing a user could ever do, you instead build some more open-ended part of your system, whether it's plugins, extensions, user scripting, you name it. But really, whatever you do, there's always going to be, I have to keep double hitting this. All right. There's always going to be like this part, right? And depending on how you draw this line, this could be the majority of your users, right? Where there is no world that the piece of software you have built will accommodate every need of every user, and that's fine, right? We can accept that that's how it is. And there are these nice, beautiful visions of some future. Like this one is this idea of information substrates from Michel Lafon. Really great academic research on how we could imagine some world where you have this big kind of mixing pot of affordances and software, kind of this closed box-like appliance-like app model fades away, and we have something better in its place. We might hear a little bit about something in this direction tomorrow from Peter. I'm hopeful. This is great. This is a possible future, but unfortunately, it's not the one we have today, right? So what we do have today, and the way that we deal with the computing landscape as it is as users, is we establish these folk user practices, right? So I'm sure you're familiar with folklore, folk stories. You might be familiar with the term folksonomy that emerged when Twitter hashtags were kind of being invented by the community. These are bottom-up practices that people establish as ways to adapt the affordances that you have available to fill your needs when there is nothing else that exists. This is from a great blog by Maggie Appleton. And here's a couple of examples, right? Spreadsheets were not really made to be a pixel art editor, but they totally can be. This bollard thing, not meant to be a way to hold your coffee, but it's an affordance, so it will be. Is anyone familiar with this adage? I think law should really be in quotes. It's more like an observation. Has anyone heard this? Great, a few of you. So it's this really nice observation about software, right? And it says that with a sufficiently large number of consumers of your API, it doesn't actually matter what you promise as your external contract of your system. Any observable behavior will eventually be depended on by somebody, right? So it doesn't matter how much you try and hide the internals of your system. If something is observable, people will depend on it eventually, right? And this is the challenge of really true semantic versioning. Like we kind of don't actually have a solution to this yet. And there's really an analogy here for end users. One sec. And I think you could say it something like this, right? That with a sufficient number of users, any affordance that your software gives you, any capability that it has that it exposes to users is going to be taken advantage of by someone, right? They're going to come to depend on this thing that was not part of the designed for use case. My favorite example of this is this little question here, right? I'm wondering if I should actually ask this question. Does anyone want to volunteer an answer to this question? If you had this on your screen, you want to know how many pixels high it is, what would you do? Any volunteers? Not yet. Okay, we'll get there. Okay, so the way that I would do this is, I would change my screen settings if I'd seen this coming. All right, so what I would do on Mac is I would whip out this screenshot tool. I would line up that line with the top of the box, drag that down, and I can see that's about 58 pixels, right? This is not a measurement tool, it's a screenshot tool, but isn't it both, right? It gives you the pixel size of something, and as a user, I don't know what this thing is called, right? I know this, Shift Command 4 on my laptop brings this up. So to me, it doesn't really make a difference if it's a screenshot tool or a tape measure. Whoop. There is going to be a little bit of this screen messing around here. All right. Okay. So let's talk about user agency on the web specifically. How many people in the room make software that runs on the web or in say, Electron or Tauri or one of these? All right, that's a lot. Who makes software that doesn't run on the web? All right, some of both. This is good. So unfortunately for you, this is going to be about the web now. All right, so something I hope I can get you to take away is that we can get a lot more out of the web if we stop viewing it as just a kind of compile or build target for our software and more than just a rendering stack. It is these things too, but it's more than that, right? There was this period of the web where we thought that everything was going to be these semantically meaningful markdown documents, right? You would have elements that corresponded to every possible UI element or piece of meaning. I don't think we quite got there. A lot of the web is just a bunch of divs, right? But we can still do a lot with that, right? So one angle we can take at this is looking at the HTML of a web page as a source of data. An example of this, if this will play. So this is a project called Wildcard by a researcher called Geoffrey Litt. There are others, but he's the main one here. And what this is doing is it is treating the HTML of your page as this queryable source of data and giving you this spreadsheet interface. So, these functions here and like the data that is being extracted is not using APIs or like the affordances that have been built for this purpose, but because the way this app is built, right, Hacker News in this case, is rendering all this on the web, it actually, without designing it intentionally up front, exposes some really valuable data that you can do useful things with. An example that I use all the time, as in I actually use the software, is this little extension called the Zotero connector extension. Has anyone used Zotero? Right? Okay, there's a few. So Zotero is a citation manager, really nice, useful, but its best feature, in my opinion, is this extension where you hit a button and it dumps all of this data, right? It dumps authors and abstracts and titles and everything that it can possibly grab into your local database. And the way that it's doing this is you basically have this army of maintainers maintaining these translation layers between, in this case, ACM, and keeping track of where in the DOM all this data is so that it can be scraped and you get structured data out. Let me show a couple things here. All right. I'm going to switch on screen mirroring because I don't think I can do this otherwise. Just bear with me. Oh, now I can't see it here. All right, one sec. There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay. All right. So just to kind of reinforce that this is not like the render stacks of other software, let me take, this is maybe 30 lines of code or so, and if I take that and I open up my console and I slap it in, we now have a 3D web page. This is fun, not very useful. I like that you can do it, right? And if you try and do this in, say, a game engine as a mod, let alone something that is that you have to kind of deobfuscate and decompile, this is kind of trivial, and I think that's kind of delightful. All right, ooh, not this. This. So we can do something a little bit more useful here. If I go here, all right. So this is the website of this guy, Stephen Kell, interesting researcher. So I have not touched his website, right? But because we're on the web, I can hit this button. Things shift a little bit. And now all of a sudden, I can grab this and I can, squiggle on his website. And I can take his website and move things around. And if I want to transform this data and kind of use it as a source of data, I can, for example, take this and I can say, I don't know, make this. I'm sure you've seen LLMs doing this kind of stuff a million times over by now. But the fun part here to me, right, is that I'm bringing the computation kind of to where the data already is, right? I'm not copying this URL into some app that gives me these affordances. I am injecting a bunch of new behavior into an environment that was never meant to support it, right? This website kind of looks like it's from a couple of decades ago. It's not. That's just the aesthetic of computer science researchers in 2025. But I find this personally really compelling, and the web is, at the moment, the only place that you can really kind of do this stuff. So we'll see how quick I get at this by the end of this talk. Nope. Okay. All right. So to me, this is actually the most important point with this kind of HTML as data model, because you might be looking at that stuff and thinking that like that is a terrible way to do this, and you would be right. If you have an API for these things, you're way better off, right? APIs are more efficient, they're more robust, they're going to be easier to work with. All of that is fantastic. But the truth is that not everything has an API. And for the ones that do, they can often change underfoot. There was a large ecosystem of Twitter extensions that when Twitter changed their business models and changed their API pricing, became entirely unviable, right? So a lot of people that depended on them, all of a sudden, that can no longer work. And so while this kind of web page scraping approach and all of this stuff is fragile against design changes, it is robust against business model changes. The only exception is really if you're rendering to, say, an HTML canvas. So Google, a lot of their products like Slides, and I want to say Word, that's Microsoft's. But if you're rendering to a canvas, it becomes this like opaque blob again, and then you're basically back in the same land as building, game mods from the outside without any first-class support. All right, let's go to another demo. Let's see how many of these I can get through before something goes wrong. I can see my next slide, but I think you're probably right. I should just leave it mirrored. Let's try that. Okay. All right, so we got my desktop here. We have a couple of windows. Neither of these really have APIs, right? They don't have any programmatic ways to hook into them. I mean, item might, text edit, I'm pretty sure it doesn't. But in this case, what I can do is I can do something like this. I can chuck an arrow into text edit, and it'll stick to it. And if I go the other side, chuck it into here, stick it to here, then maybe just for the hell of it, let's get another line. And then if we put some text on these, let's say summarize, and let's say this one is convert sand MP4 to GIF on desktop, something like this, right? And if I hit go, fingers crossed, hey, okay. So what just happened here is, obviously this is just a bunch of LLM stuff, right? We've all seen it. But in this case, we are piping some output from an LLM into my terminal here. We're then grabbing that output, and we are doing some other LLM thing, right? LLMs are nice because they're quick to demo with. I hope you can kind of use a bit of imagination here and see some lovely programming language that I'm sure you'll invent doing a much better job than what I'm doing here. And the reason that this is possible in the first place is because there are accessibility APIs, right? We have APIs for limited reading and writing to Windows that is generic and that does not require the support of the software developers in this case. Right. So the point I want to make with this, and I'll touch on this again at the end, but accessibility is often viewed as this thing for some subset of people, right? And I think that's a huge mistake. I think there is this really strong case to be made that accessibility and the ability to have agency over your software actually go hand in hand. And so as a general rule of thumb, if you make your software more accessible and more open for that purpose, you actually open up more doors for people that are making extensions and trying to meet their needs with what you give them. All right, we're going to play one of my favorite games here, which is mashing two existing concepts together and seeing what comes out. All right, so the first of these is adversarial interoperability, which is a mouthful. Is anyone familiar with this term? At least one. Okay. So this was coined by Cory Doctorow at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and it characterizes this kind of malleability where you have some ability of a new product or service to work with existing products without their permission or their kind of first-class support. Classic example would be the cigarette lighters in cars, right? They might be for cigarette lighters, but you can use it to charge your phone. You can kind of do anything with it, including things that are potentially dangerous, right? That the car manufacturer is not going to sign off on, but they've left this door open for people to do their own things with it. Second concept here, I promise these are the only two potentially new ideas here. So this other one is malleable software, which is really at the tail end of a long-running tradition of kind of end-user programming and trying to push the frontier of how we can change and shape software to our needs. Most people in this crowd are very kind of discontent with the state of computing, which I always find admirable and appealing. And I think it could be best summed up with this sentence, which is software that is as easy to change as it is to use, which is a delightful ambition. I think we're a long way away. Again, maybe tomorrow, Peter might have some updates on this. So this is the fun game, right? We have two words, two concepts. If we mush them together, I think we get something kind of useful and interesting, which is adversarial malleability, right? So we can look at this as ways that we can change software to suit your needs without permission or first-party kind of support or facilitation of the software producer. So this is stuff that falls outside of your feature set, that falls outside of a plugin ecosystem, that you don't support, and potentially that you wouldn't actually want to happen. So it depends on how much you like your users, whether you'll want them to be able to do this stuff. So one example, reader mode, which you have in some browsers. I was trying to find this in Chrome. I don't know if it exists in Chrome. If it doesn't, it would seem like that's maybe to do with their advertising business model. I'm not sure. But point being here, right, that the underlying kind of structure and shape of this web page is being completely overridden, right? The design intent of, in this case, the Splash conference is not being respected with this tool. But it's a lot nicer to read, especially for some users. This is another example that I recently discovered, which I really love. This guy, Henry Zhu, made this little extension for Blue Sky, I suppose, where as you're browsing the web, it'll be querying Blue Sky, finding links to whatever it is that you're currently looking at. So it gives you this really nice feeling of every place on the web having like a comment feature, a really good comment feature where you can find people that you follow and see what they're saying. But of course, well, actually, maybe Archive does support this, but this is one of those nice examples where we're taking the existing affordances of some other system, in this case, the Blue Sky network, and we're bringing it to our data, kind of where we're already doing our work. We're not getting people to have to leave and go somewhere else. Yeah, that's what I just said. Okay, couple more things here. So myself and a friend, Chris Shank, recently been exploring some of these questions of how much can you do with a little, especially on the web. So, am I doing for time? Okay. Let me do this. All right. Yeah, we can see stuff. Great. Okay, so this is a kind of web-based canvas environment thing. It's a research project, right? So labels don't work so well just yet. But in this case, we have a couple of custom elements for these maps here, and we have a custom element for this spreadsheet here. And we have these very wiggly pieces of rope because we haven't made good-looking arrows yet. And in this case, and on these, I won't dive into this, but this is a programming model that I developed called event propagators, which is a really simple programming model. Feel free to ask me about it. I think it's quite interesting. And you'll notice if I move this around, we're going to update the spreadsheet, and we're then going to go the other way as well, right? So we could, I don't know, 55, sure. And now we're in the ocean. Great. So as a feature, this is not at all compelling, right? There are way better versions of maps. There are way better versions of spreadsheets. There's probably way better versions of both of these things together. But the compelling thing to us, kind of in doing this research, is that neither side really knows anything about the other. We're taking basic affordances of the web, in this case event propagation, and we're using that to inject new behavior and functionality into environments that don't support it. A big part of the goal here is being able to inject these affordances kind of anywhere that you are, right? So if you're on someone else's web page and it's missing a feature that you want, I think it would be great if users had a smaller gap to bringing that feature to where it's missing for them personally. Okay, how are we doing time? All right. So I'll show you one more thing here, just because it is simple, and I think I find this just incredibly delightful for whatever reason. So this is a page with not much on it. It has a pre-tag with some JSON text in it. This is incredibly basic HTML stuff. These up here, if we look at this this CSS file, and I look at the sidebar here. All right. Okay, so we have a style tag. This is what's driving the style of the page. You'll notice that the style tag is actually editable. And for anyone that's worked on the web, I would love to know if other people knew about this already. It was an entirely unknown fact to me that style tags, and actually everything in this header, you can absolutely make these visible. It's just a default CSS value, and if you set display block, all of a sudden you can see your styles on your page. That personally blew my mind. And I can demonstrate that this is the case because the syntax highlighting in this is actually a font. There is no JavaScript. And if I delete this font, we lose our syntax highlighting. And in this case, we also have, if I get rid of some of this, we have the world's lowest fidelity, maybe worst IDE you could build, which is a content editable div. But in this case, it is connected to a language server with a custom attribute. So if you're in this very niche situation where you're on the web and you need full language server support for looking at some piece of text, you can just add this little attribute to a div, already any piece of text, and you'll get full syntax validation, autocomplete, all of that stuff. This is the same JSON language server that VS Code uses. We've done the same for all the other common languages. Okay. One more thing. This is the most likely one to go wrong. me reload this, reload this. So we've been exploring some ways that we can bring collaboration kind of into the web and really kind of mush it in there, right? Not have some separate layer that is for collaboration. And the way we've been looking at doing that is, well, let me just see if this works first. Okay, right. So we're moving stuff around. If this was on a second device, this would work the same way with about the same amount of latency, and we can edit stuff. Anyone that's used any kind of collaborative whiteboard thing, this is nothing fancy, nothing new, except that the way we're doing this is that we're actually treating the HTML itself as the kind of the data and the source of truth here. So all we had to do to make this work, other than implement multiplayer syncing, which is the easy part, I'm sure, is just add this little attribute. So in this case, we add this folk sync attribute to the body, and now every part of this HTML and all of its attributes are going to be synced with a CRDT over a WebSocket to any other device that's connected to this same URL. I was tempted to turn this into a QR code, but I worry that the Wi-Fi here would struggle with that. Okay. Oh, I'll just show one more thing, just for fun, just to prove that this is really just HTML, which is if I were to grab this shape here, open up my inspector, and delete it. Hey, okay, couldn't quite get through without a demo breaking. You could see what was meant to happen, right? I feel like I've got to at least live up to traditions of doing live demos and have something not work. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so I think we're actually going to come in under time here. Okay, so couple things to wrap up here. One, users will find a way, right? It doesn't matter really what your intentions are. If you have enough users and they need to do something, they're going to do it regardless of what you give them, right? So I think the takeaway, hopefully, is that even if you can't afford to build ladders or features or plugin ecosystems and whatnot, trying to give people hooks into your system that you don't necessarily have control over, that you don't necessarily have the ability to really support and help triage, I think that's still valuable. A big part of this, which I kind of breezed over, is that if you have stable identifiers in your system, right? Let's say you have a social media thing. What's a better example here? You have some database, right? You can query it, and it has items, and they have IDs. It can be really tempting to hide that state in a way that is entirely inaccessible to browser extensions and the rest of it. And my kind of ask, I guess, is put this, if it's not important that it's truly hidden, put it somewhere that is accessible. It doesn't have to be in the URL. It sounds ridiculous, but if you have some piece of your HTML that has that data on it, that all of a sudden gives people a hook to build new affordances around your data, even if you can't do that yourselves. I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.